Thank you for coming tonight and welcome to Art Talks. Tonight we have artist and photojournalist Rosalie Winard. Winard photographs birds as one bite a family member caught in an intimate moment, and her avian portraits have been praised as both meditative and exhilarating. Rosalie moved to Salt Lake City from New York City in 2011 to produce a photographic archive of the birds of the Great Salt Lake at the Marriott Library at the University of Utah. Her work on avian life has been published in the award-winning book and exhibition, Wild Birds of the American Wetlands, recently shown at the Utah Museum of Natural History and the North Dakota Museum of Art. Her photographs have been published in Audubon, Art Forum, On Earth, Time, the New York Times, Le Monde, Forbes, Modern Photography, Museum of Modern Art brochures, and have been shown on 60 Minutes, NBC, PBS, and the BBC. Her unique avian imagery seeks to promote awareness and conservation of large wetland birds and their habitats in North America. Please welcome Rosalie Winard.
I've got to tell you, that's the best welcome I have had. I just want to give you a little background how I got to what you're about to see. My college degree is not in art, it's in natural history. And I actually I went to a small experimental school in Florida, a 4-year school, and ended up doing research on brown pelicans and working on National Science Foundation grants. And I had a 2.5-year project on a bred and breeding display of the brown pelican, had a little canoe, and I used to bring photographers and videographers out to where I studied the birds. And initially I was going to be an ornithologist, and I realized between my junior senior year that I wasn't a scientist. And came back and originally started working in documentary film, and I wanted to do movies about the pelicans. But this is long enough ago. It was 16 millimeter. It wasn't HD, and not just cheaply play with things. So I ended up working in documentary film. Then I taught video art for a brief period and worked on some shows at some of the major art museums. And somewhere along the line, somebody handed me a camera to document an art show that they had put up. And it immediately got published. And I started my photo career started actually shooting artists' installations. And at some point in there, being totally not technical and somebody likes to teach themselves, I had a job where I had to use a flash. And I had no clue how to use a flash, and I totally botched the job. And my reaction to that was, I better assign myself something to better learn how to do this. And my very first job out of college, I taught for 10 months at a school for autistic and brain injured children. And I went back to shoot this one young autistic man, which turned into a 20-year photo essay on a series of autistic adults. One of whom is Temple Grandin, who some of you may have seen when she was here a year or two ago. And this is how life can be. You follow a passion. I mean, as that was going on, I was getting jobs shooting like feature news. I never did like war stuff, but feature news in New York, documenting. I shot annual reports for children's foundations. I shot affairs at the Waldorf Astoria. I mean, whatever I could make money at, I basically did. But I did start shooting stills for PBS and BBC. And in 1997, the neurologist Oliver Sacks wrote a piece about Temple Grandin, who I had been photographing at that point for 10 years. And I got hired on to a film that he shot that's pre the HBO film, Stairway to Heaven, about Temple. And this is also the days of film. So up until that point, I had always been hired. The publicists, especially the BBC, would call and say, are you free this day? This is how much we can pay you. The last thing I find out is who or what I was shooting, because it ranged from shooting Francois Giraud, who is Paloma Picasso's mother, to drug-sniffing pigs, which is a whole fun story. But the publicist in those days would know, okay, you need to shoot color neg, color slides, black and white. So Errol Morris reads this piece in the New Yorker that's been written, and he is an Oscar-winning documentary filmmaker. He did Fox of War. And I get hired to work on this film. We decided to do it at Temple. And a week before we start, we get funding, and the production manager calls me and says, okay, it's a go. I say, okay, what kind of film do you want me to shoot? He talks to Errol Morris, who gets back to him, and they say to me, oh, shoot whatever you want, which is the sign of an artist, somebody who's not trying to control. Usually publicity is so controlled. So I had enough experience with this. I said, well, find out what kind of film he's shooting, and I will parallel it. And he was doing a documentary with 5 kinds of film, which is very, very unusual. One of which was black and white infrared, which I had never shot. I'd always thought was rather gimmicky, but I learned, and it's highly technical. You can never see the light of day. You need to shoot it with a 25 red filter, but luckily the lab that I used introduced me to somebody who was as non-techy as I can be and just said, these are the rules you have to do. So I went to Colorado in February, shot it on a job. It was not exciting, and that truly would have been that, except when I got back, I got one of my 3 or 4 corporate jobs shooting in Boca Raton, Florida, IBM executives partying who had done enough printer sales. I mean, it was one of the more fun jobs. But I thought, oh, black and white infrared, because I'm about to start showing you this stuff. The whites glow, and I thought, big white birds, this could be beautiful. Because I'd always felt, I had such a profound, in college I was called the Pelican Lady, and I used to give a lot of talks, and I was involved with environmental causes. But I didn't take pictures, and I never had pictures that I really liked. There was an essence of the bird that all the birds that I never saw in photography. So after this job, I went to Sarasota, stayed with friends. One of the very first shoot, I had pictures come out that were like nothing I'd ever seen. And that's how this whole thing started. And I'll start showing you in 1 minute. But the link to Utah, how I ended up here, at a certain point, I've been trying to get my book published on my 20-year photo essay of autistic adults, which was long enough ago. It was, except for Temple, other people in it did not get better. It's very hard to get things published. But my agent called me up one day and said, I have these agents I have lunch with once a month. Didn't you tell me you had photographs of birds or something? Because they're looking for photo books. And I went and met with this couple and showed them literally 6 pictures. And the wife happened to be the godmother of a famous bird illustrator. And she knew that she was seeing something she'd never seen. So anyway, they got really excited and they were like, oh, we need to find a writer. And I discovered Terry Tempest Williams, who I'm assuming here, most people know, the naturalist, she's from here. And Terry brought me out to the Great Salt Lake. She saw the work, she loved the work. And this turned into, this is my book, 12 years of doing this. Somewhere into this, and here, this is Florida, but this is my first trip to Bear River, the White Pelicans. And you can see this glow that starts to happen. So let's start to look at some of these pictures. So I'm going to take you around the country because the book is shot in about 7 states. And that white glow is exactly what started me. And the detail that black and white infrared gives is what started me doing this. Unfortunately, the film stock that I shoot now doesn't exist. It's been discontinued. I happen to have a freezer full, which is what I'm using for this archive at the Marriott. This is a picture that is, what I love are the details of birds, and I don't know if people see my YouTube when the show is up, but I quit that this could be the cover of Bird Vogue. Here we have what the black and white infrared does. It blows out your grays. This is a black-crowned nighthawk. I'm going to give you a little bird history too, or information. This happens to be a species that is in the Great Salt Lake. This is all over the country, black-crowned nighthawks. And those 2 little feathers are during breeding season. And you see these, and on the Great Salt Lake, you can't get near them like most birds because they have so much territory that they have in habitat. I've been 2 inches away in New York City up by the Hudson River on a rail. In Chinatown in Oakland, California, they hang out by the fish trucks going to the Chinese restaurants. So they're pretty ubiquitous. This is in Louisiana. This is actually a little blue heron. It's going to turn blue. And I'm just always trying to get a feel for the birds in their land, in their habitat. This is up at Bear River. These are tundra swans. And this, for anybody who's interested in working more with cameras and photography and not posing people, because I started out shooting people, and if I knew how hard some of this was going to be to work with really wild birds in Florida, even though the birds are wild, there's a lot less territory, they're habituated to people, you can get a lot closer. I suddenly was having to shoot with long lenses. This was a whole day until finally these birds flew over me, and I had no idea how big these birds were. A hunter came out as we were leaving, 6-foot-tall guy with the bird draped. They're big birds. This is shot on the Great Salt Lake. These are American avocets, and this I shot from an airboat. So part of all of this has been like I get to have adventure in a way that I wasn't for the first 20 years of my career. Once I started doing this, I had a lot of fun. And airboats are fairly amazing how close you can get to the birds. This is a little black-necked stilt chick, again, just shot from an airboat. And again, that black that you get, that's the infrared. I mean, I once worked, actually before I started fully shooting on my own and making a living that way, I worked as an assistant for a number of different photographers. And one of them, Rosalie Winard, had spent a lot of time in France. And most of you are doing darkroom work, am I right? So she had this set of filters that I've never seen anywhere else that actually created an infrared type effect. It made the whites glow. It just kicked the contrast in a way that regular filters in a larger don't. This is one of nature's great phenomenons. This is the Platte River in Nebraska, and 500,000 cranes go through there every year. I was lucky enough, I stayed at a research facility, so I was in private blinds, and they dance. I mean, and the sound, when the show was up, we just had a tape rolling of the sandhill cranes going on, and I am shooting this with the longest lens that I've ever used. I used to be a member of Canon Professional Services, which allowed me to borrow lenses from them. I just had to pay for the shipping back, a lot of this work, I really don't like tripods, and I'll be shooting in places where they're your classic bird photographers who come up right up to me and say, you can't do what you're doing, because, off a tripod, I'm pointing at the sun, I'm shooting it at funny angles. In this case, I had a 600mm lens that I had to have on the tripod. And then I pinched my finger trying to get it to do something else. This is the cranes coming in. And again, I know this is an art talk, but we use some nature stuff. These birds, when they're very high up, this is the same lens basically that shot those close-ups, so you can have a sense of the distance. You're hearing these birds, and from the minute that they open their wings, they never flap. So it's one of the funnier nature moments, because you have all these parachuting down cranes, thousands of them, just and they float down, and they talk and they talk. Now this was used. This is in Los Angeles. This is near LAX, and this is a snowy egret, who I always think is like he's wearing high-top sneakers. And this was a picture I had worked through Terry Tempest Williams. I met some activists working, trying to keep the wetlands around LAX protected. It's Biona wetlands. The technical name at that point was Playa Vista, and Steven Spielberg was trying to put in a huge photo studio, and there was going to be a big housing complex, and there was a big fight, and ultimately the wetlands won out, which was a good thing because there's naturally occurring methane underneath, so it would have been really dangerous to build. But at one point, Marcia Hanscom, the director of this activist group, had said to me, if you ever find a picture that we could use as a poster, let me know. And I shot this, I was going through my pictures and I thought, perfect, urban bird. So I donated the picture. It was one of those great things, because sometimes, it's great to make money, we need to make money, but you also have to follow your heart. And I give a lot of stuff to nonprofits for them to be able to use. And in this case, I gave the picture. The printing was donated, the paper was donated. It turns out the printer was somebody who'd done all of Ansel Adams' posters. So this unbelievable poster was made on a very heavy stock that was posted outside. It doesn't rain that much in LA, so it was up for 3 or 4 months. And the designer just was very simple type. This is an egret, he just put big R, regrets, question mark, and then a small thing, saved by all the wetlands. And it won a graphic design award that they entered today. This is more a photojournalistic picture. This is not thrilling, but this is a rare thing to see. It's a whooping crane who is wearing a radio transmitter, feeding right next to a sandhill crane. And this is one of those funny moments. The scientist who I was with from the state of Florida, the head crane guy, when I was shooting the cranes, he said to me, oh, well, you're going to retouch out that transmitter, right? You want a real whooping crane. I said, this is a real whooping crane. And as much as my mission is about the beauty of the birds, it's also the reality of the birds. So we left this in. And this, my book, my publisher to this day does not know one species from the next. She loved the work, and there were a couple of photojournalistic pictures I had really pushed to get in the book. And this was one because of how unusual it is, not because it's like the world's greatest picture, but it's fun. This is a little Brady red chick. This is a roseate spoonbill, and this is one of those interesting things. People frequently ask me, especially if I'm in a real bird crowd, why do you shoot in black and white? Why don't you ever shoot in color? And I do shoot in color, but I have chosen not to shoot the birds in color because I think you see something different and you can make up a story more. What's really interesting about this bird, this is a pink bird, and this is during breeding season. And when you take the color out, the bill, the thing they're named for really gets accentuated. But this bird is amazing during breeding season because it's like 2 shades of pink and white and a little peach on its bum, and the bill turns like a yellowish green. And that is cool. This is just Grady Brett. This is in here for graphic, that great, they're like ballet dancers. This is a little snowy blubber chick, and these are on they're not endangered, but in the way birds are listed, they can be nationally endangered in the state, threatened. This is threatened. It's listed in some states. We don't have a huge population here, and this was just a great moment because I was out, this is at Bear River Bird Refuge, and I was out with the then head of avian biologist of the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Project, who's like 6'2". And we were doing a survey on the dikes from the truck, and all of a sudden he jumps out of the truck with his little tiny digital camera, and he's running around, and I'm like, I can't figure out what's going on because I can't see it from the truck, and I get out, and he had spotted this bird. So it was this, I should have actually taken a picture of both of them, because, that bird that's a little shorebird. There's John. This is in Louisiana. This is Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, Lake Martin. And it used to be, it's where the roseate spoonbill pictures were taken. It used to be a major breeding place for the birds. And it was taken over by the Nature Conservancy, and unfortunately, they kind of kicked out all the local people that had been working, who then went in and disturbed the birds, so we cannot. The birds are just starting to come back, I think. But this is a hammock. This was just, I was in a little bateau, they call it. There's a lot of Creole. It's like a half rowboat, half canoe. Totally good. Now this, you know, one thing that drove my book designer crazy, and when we had the show, is that I crop by what I feel and see, and I crop in different ways. And this was something, I was thinking of Japanese scrolls. And so I mean, we worked with it, but it's not what people usually do. This is from an airboat. These are white-faced ibis, which the largest breed population in the world is on the Great Salt Lake. There's like 500,000 of them. And just this very rare. This is an American Avocet, again from taken from an airboat. Editing this work was really challenging because as opposed to when I shot people, and in the early days you would do Polaroids anyway, but you could tell what you were getting as you were getting it, whether I was doing studio work or candid work. With the birds, almost, except when I was in Florida in really still situations and really close, and I really saw what I was getting, I would come back from a shoot and I would think, oh no, you know, I'd look at the film, I didn't get anything that I thought I got. And I had to wait a couple of days to then go back and see what it was that I did get. And this was one of those shots, you know, things happen so quickly with the camera. I didn't know I took this picture, but when I saw it, it was like, far out. And then this is about working with other people. When I started working with my book designer, he said to me at the beginning, I want to see everything you've shot. And I said to him, no, you don't. There's like, it was the outtakes that my ratio of shooting of what works to what doesn't is extremely high, although classically what has been coming down the pike with the Great Salt Lake is that I will have sometimes 1 or 2 rolls that have a lot of stuff and then rolls of nothing. So I ended up, he did see a case of the work, and this is an image he pulled out. I've never seen it, you know, which is why it's always good to show other people your work. Okay? Now, this is my guess where this is question. Who wants to guess where this?
Right there, in the top right corner, like on the branch.
Right, no, not where's the bird, where, but you're right, that's where the bird is. Where's the chicken? No, good guess, but no. It's one more person. Nobody? No, this is all in North America. This is Brooklyn, which is why I throw this in just. It's the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens. If you look on the very far left, you can sort of see the beginning of apartment buildings. And this is a classic, if you're somebody who's a street photographer and you're just looking to see what's going on, you may have an intention. I went out to the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens because there was a great egret that was hanging out in the lily pods. And I never actually got to shoot that. And then I was walking in a different part of the Botanic Garden, and this great blue heron just flew up right in front of me. So it was just one of those, whoop. And I love it because nobody guesses that it's Brooklyn. And now the white-faced ibis, which you saw with millions in that picture, this is a different species of the same bird. And it's the same bird that opening shot was. This is in Florida. This is a white ibis. And I literally was running along the beach with not a big lens shooting this. And this is in Point Reyes in California, which is one of the more beautiful places. One of the fun things sometimes as an artist, I haven't had a lot, but I had a residency in Point Reyes Station in order to work on writing of the book. And I also went out and photographed. And this is one of my favorite places in this country. We're back in Nebraska. So I went out 2 years in a row because it was one of those locations, it was really tricky. And The second year, I slept all night in a hunting blind. And the birds surrounded me and talked all night long. And then now we're in the more photojournalistic. Part of what I did, there was nobody saying this is where you should go, and I had really no funding. And except for this one piece I got funded. The largest breeding colony of American white pelicans is in North Dakota. I mean, when I started coming out to Utah, I was like, there's white pelicans on the Great Salt Lake. What are white pelicans doing in the middle of this country? And on Gunnison Island, which is the last thing I'm going to show you a little film, is like the third or fourth largest breeding colony. But I went up to North Dakota, which at that point there were 28,000 birds. These are like about 3-4-month-old chicks. So you can see they're not fully, especially the bird on the left. I mean, it's like a chicken wing. He doesn't have, no way he's going to fly, and none of these are going to fly. But they're big. And 100 volunteers, 100 of us banded 2,500 chicks in 4 hours. And it was one of the more fun days I've had. People I had met before who worked for USGS have been saying, are you crazy? This is going to be the most disgusting, smelly thing you will ever do in your life. And it rained the day before we went out, and it was in the 60s instead of in the high 80s, and the birds weren't stressed, and we worked. So we were broken up into teams of 4, and we just got to work. And they're not, you can tell, I mean, they're not trying to get away. This is the Where's Waldo picture. See? Up in the middle. Here's a recently banded bird, and he's a younger bird because he doesn't even have, he's still down. But in here, in North Dakota, you can see one leg has a silver band, you can barely see the other one, the CO96, that's meant, and it was colored for anybody who saw a flying bird to report back to Fish and Wildlife or USGS. Here in Utah, they do wing tags. This is kind of my comic relief of what frequently, you know, especially out west, when you go to wetlands, you're in very isolated areas, and very frequently there's cattle. And now in our area, no, I'm further south, but around the Great Salt Lake, there's a huge problem with type of invasive plant, Phragmites. So they're starting to raise cattle there because of the Phragmites, so cattle are pretty there. This is brown pelican. And some of them, in my book, they all just have their taxonomic names and location and date. But they have pet names that I give them. And this is John James, after John James Audubon. And this is one of the pictures from the first roll I ever shot of this stuff. And this is another picture that my book designer found. It's sandhill cranes, and you can see them talk. You know, they really are very vociferous. This is great blue heron, and I'm chasing him. He's chasing the fisherman. Here's again. This is the white ibis, and I was running when I took this picture. There was enough light. Infrared film is a film that doesn't come with an ASA rating on it. And at the point I was shooting there, I'd been told you couldn't shoot faster than 200 ASA, although you can shoot it at 400. But it was so bright, I was able to freeze it. These are wood storks. It's the only stork in this country. And the adults have like a reptilian skin neck. They're a big bird. And this one I nicknamed Lady's Luncheon. This is just a graphic picture, a shadow, the snowy egret's starting to get its breeding plumage, the wind is blowing. This is film. Did I see this when I shot it? Of course I didn't see this one. I mean, you don't see that, but this to me is the magic of film. And, I wasn't doing a pan, which you can make effects like that. But I love them as kind of, they're like the magic accents. This is the kind of shot that I'd be shooting, and somebody would say to me, "You can't do that." But I would do it. This is an anhinga, which is related to cormorants, for anybody who knows. And this is the kind of graphic place that I like to take birds if I can, where it's a design element. You know, it's not always about emotion. Sometimes it's just about the sheer beauty. It's like magpies. I don't have a good shot of a magpie, but I think magpies, kind of like this, the anhingas, they're like flying Navajo blankets. They're these patterns that are beautiful. This is a snowy egret again, like the one on the fence, and this is a really old picture. And this I nicknamed Jackie after Jackie Onassis because I always thought it was a bird with attitude. And I one time was at an art opening in New York, and she was there, and she was like a statue. I mean, she had such a physical presence. She was actually, I think, a very shy person because she was kind of frozen in the headlights, but she had that attitude. Here we have a little ballet. Stilts, which you saw in that Japanese scroll picture. They're about this big, and they have these really long, bizarre legs that bend in all kinds of funny ways. And here's just a group of avocets going to feed. Also everywhere. Just a quiet picture. This is a white-faced ibis and an American avocet. And in this picture, you actually can see the white face. The misnomer is that it's literally maybe a month out of the year that they have that. It's during breeding season. It's almost, you know, you rarely see the white face. Luckily, there's no other ibis out here that include. So it goes. This we saw, the back cover of the book. And then this is another picture. This is brown pelicans over the Pacific Ocean at Point Reyes. And my designer found this picture. Diana sent this picture. This is shot from the hunting blind. And this was interesting. Sometimes when you have a project, you set a set of boundaries, and I had been shooting this thing in black and white infrared. That was my film, and I suddenly was in a position that, I couldn't shoot at dawn with that film. There just really wasn't enough light. And when I went back the second year, I really wanted to shoot at dawn, and I had to come up with another film that was somehow parallel. So this, unfortunately, is also now discontinued just recently, T-Max 3200. It's a very fast-speed film. And this was an amazing morning. I mean, the birds, it was a long lens, but I was surrounded by these birds in the line. It was great. And then there's some Canada geese. This is a cornfield in New England, actually, with some crows, just a landscape. This has been nicknamed by other than somebody who bought this picture has named it the B-52. And then this is from the first roll I shot also. This is a great egret and a laughing gull. And I was as close to the bird as the front row. Doesn't happen in this state, that's Florida. And this also was from that first roll. And this was one of those moments, sometimes, I mean, probably because I didn't go to art school, I sometimes get a little insecure. So when I first saw this on the contact sheet, I went, oh no, I cut off its head. And a week later, I went back and I looked and I went, this is beautiful, you know, and I believed in it. And 10 years later, one of my higher functioning autistic friends, who's the photographer, was looking at it and said, but you didn't cut off its head. I was like, I cut off its head. He's like, you did not cut this bird's head off. And nobody had seen it. On the wing is the shadow of the bill and the head. And this also, the original book cover, because that's how I shot it. The original book cover was this picture with the bottom blank part cut out. And Random House distributes this book. So their sales force, when they saw what my publisher had done, was like, we'll do what you want, but we think you're going to have a hard time selling a headless bird book. So, you know, and my publisher was really respectful, because she was like, I'll do what you want. You know, this is your book. This is, you know, it's so beautiful. But it will affect sales. And I was probably old enough to realize, okay, fine, we can put this inside the book. You know, it was more important to me that the book get disseminated than that I proved a point. And this ended up actually, full frame like that, becoming a book cover of a fiction novel. That somebody had been waited till there was a publisher that I knew, Soho Press, a small, mostly fiction press, was so in love with this picture. He sat on this picture for 2 years till the right story came up, which was about a widower, and the book was called After. This is just light on the bottom of some immature brown pelicans, and this is infrared. It's low. This again, design. I love how the branch was, you know, mimicking the bird's bill. This is the other. It's kind of become an easy trick now that this is just water glowing. It's the right time of light. It's the way the infrared works. And this, every picture in the book was the hardest one to figure out what those little birds were. I had 4 biologists, because one thing that does happen when it's in black and white and it's in shadow is you lose certain details, and there are a lot of little shorebirds. Finally, a local ornithologist who knew the area and was like, okay, the big birds have done one, this, or the little guys have done this. This is who would be with the Dowager. And we decided it was all. This is Dashiell Hammett. This is a wood stork, and this has been used actually as a CD and record cover. And I was laying on the sidewalk for this one. Oops, sorry. This is out of Bear River, just a documentary kind of picture. These are phalaropes out of the Great Salt Lake, which again, we have the world's largest population, and this is like less than a second later. There's a thing that birds do, starlings do, called a reverberation. It's like when fish school, and the way when they're flying as a flock and the light hits them, and it's like one organism, and these guys do that. And it's the next thing I want to try to do a movie of. These are some white pelicans out in Florida. Wood storks, and this is again, it's this creepy, well, this is going to be a perfect Halloween picture, actually. There's somebody should dress up. And there's a pretty red there. This is Sandhill Crane, who's just been puffing up. He's just been preening. Another silhouette, great blue in the wind. This is Grady Gret with breeding plumage, and I had just been fallen in love with, oh God, who's the nominee painter? Who knows painting here? He does little paintings. I will tell Amy to tell you, but I just seen a show of his paintings, and he did very domestic scenes, and he had his sister coming out of a wall with this beautiful floral dress that was the wallpaper, that was the dress that was her, that is incredibly evocative. This is the peace offering. This is here you can see the skin on the bird, and he is just carrying some nesting material. And here's Brown Pelican that's saying, that's the end of this. And what I'm going to show you now, oops, yes. So I started out by telling you, I started out doing film, wanting to do film and video, and didn't. And ended up staying in it because I couldn't afford to play with my ideas. And I could do that in photography. And there's an island in the Great Salt Lake, Gunnison Island, where the white pelicans breed, that is very very sacred, special place, and it's extremely restricted. You can only go out with the state. You're not allowed out. It's illegal to go out there. And they started banding 3 summers ago. And I was invited once, and I took some pictures, and I promised myself if I ever got to go back, that I would shoot video. And so I got to go back this past year, and I borrowed a friend's camera, and then Jan Andrews, who some of you may know, who teaches here, helped me edit this. It's not fully done, so I may narrate a little or I may not, but just so you know, this is basically it's the trip. You're going to see the boat going out and then the birds getting gathered and banded. So actually I don't. And these are 3- and 4-month-old chicks too, although there's 1 or 2 that are much younger. So I will show you.
Get all that ashore. The youngest. He didn't get there. This day we managed 250 chicks. And I actually was helping Dan. This was shot in between. You guys all right? Get closer to that. You can have the ways of it.
You're getting a little stressed. Oh, God.
Sorry. That was the game. You're gonna see your face. I know how I
Now, the only reason the pelicans
then there was nothing. So that is my trajectory really from pelicans to autism back to pelicans. And many things in between. I could show you some other things, I mean, if you want random, but first, does anybody have any questions?
What pictures of birds did you have on PBS?
The birds on PBS, it was pictures of autism. It was random. Most of my things that have been on TV have been autism related. It's other ones I've never done.
So you said that you donate most of your artwork?
No. I don't donate most of it, but I donate pieces for nonprofit use.
Okay.
So,
So
like,
how do you how do you sell your artwork for people that how do you profit from it?
I sell prints, and I have two really different things actually at this point, because my autism stuff, I sell that to textbooks. I have a number of book covers that I sold, mostly at Temple. So I have people calling me for that kind of stuff, and then I sell prints of my work. And it's usually I've just had a few shows, but I've had a couple big museum shows, and so people see that. It's been word of mouth.
I have a question. Why birds?
I fell in love with brown pelicans, and I grew up in New York City and right out of the city, and I'd never been around pelicans. I played with ants when I was a kid. I was not a nature person. And I stayed up all night one night in the spring of my freshman year of college with my boyfriend, and at dawn, I went to New College in Sarasota, Florida, and our campus was right on Sarasota Bay. And at dawn, we went to the bay, and the sun was rising. It was this very beautiful, still moment. And then there were these insane birds diving. And what happened was the next year, I mean, I've been studying psychology, but the first semester I took an environmental biology class, and the professor had us on the trips every weekend. We commuted every weekend somewhere in the state, and at the end of the term, because it was an experimental school, so that we didn't have grades, we took the long evaluations, pass-fail. But he said, I'm not going to give you a test. I want everybody in the class to write a hypothetical research grant. And point of information, the National Science Foundation next year is giving out 2 student-originated studies grants per state. And a group of you wants to do it. So a group of us applied, and we got one of the first 2 in Florida. So then I started, I started censusing the birds, and then my advisor hooked me up with an ornithologist in town who worked for Cornell, and I started, it was not a planned thing. Is that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And where can we buy print bookers? Is there online way or?
You can contact me. You can, well, and I have a few copies of the book. So, yes.
What kind of subject matter do you think you would have gotten into if you hadn't had a background in ornithology?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I went to college when I was 16, and I was so much older then. And if I hadn't gone to that college in Florida, I honestly don't know. I already had an interest in autism. I mean, I had done volunteer work in high school with kids. I don't know. I mean, one of my current absolute obsessions right now is cuttlefish, because they're so weird. And but I don't know. That's a very good question, and I really don't know how to answer that because the birds impacted me at such a young age. I mean, it's a challenge here. Where you asked about the nonprofit. See, what I'm doing here right now in Utah, I'm doing this photographic archive of the birds of the Great Salt Lake, which will end up at the Marriott Library in their special collections. Somebody's already done a Sana archive. They'll build a website, and that, I mean, I've had people say to me, "You're giving this away," but the website, the images on the website will be available for free for any kind of nonprofit images. But I'm getting funded. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be getting. I'm getting funded. I need to actually around fundraising. But through a nonprofit, I'm getting paid a salary to do this, and then ultimately I hold copyright, but already some of the state biologists, people are using my images for presentations, and this video too. It's like, I just showed it last week for the first time. 3 different people want to put it on the website. Yes?
Yeah, kind of going off her question, how do you market your work? Is it like mostly networking or?
For me, the marketing is my weak point, to be perfectly honest. But I've been lucky. I mean, I could probably be selling a whole lot more if I was more organized. But, I've had a few people who just really love my work, and they buy it for presents. And, when I was doing the book, I've done some small prints, large editions that are affordable. My big prints are not so cheap. But it's, I'm at a place right now that I really need to get a gallery, like a serious gallery or a rep, because it's hard. I mean, marketing is very tricky. And, I was lucky. I mean, I got introduced to the publisher who was 3 blocks from my apartment in New York by somebody I met here in Utah.
I have 2 questions. First is on psychology major too. How has your work changed team or intrinsically? And secondarily, I'm fascinated with the fact that you have research full of film that is the only film in last. Did you know about the technology? Why is it not available? Do you have to have special cameras? How could you get these same effects? Can you get these same effects? And then the pictures,
Yeah, that's the film. Okay, so you asked a few questions there. The cameras all still exist. What's become, it's film camera. Getting those serviced now is a real challenge. It's a sort of a nightmare. That places, there's in Manhattan, which is like one of the epicenters of film, 90% of the film labs are closed. There's just, digital has taken everything over. I got this, I was lucky, I knew I wanted to try to do this archive, so it's a very delicate film. The only thing that's special about the film and shooting the film is that you have to have a 25 red filter. You can't just shoot it, otherwise you'll fog the film. And you cannot, it literally, even in the dark, it never sees the light of day. I travel with a changing bag, so everywhere, in canoes, whatever I'm in, the camera goes in the bag, the film goes in, I shoot the film comes out, I reload it, but it's just a regular film camera. And that's, over the course of this, I started out with Nikon. I started out actually with my Minolta XD11, and then went to a Nikon, and for years I've been shooting with a Canon. Canon 1D that's been out, the body's meant for outdoors. The film, there's so much film that has been discontinued. You can get, this is Kodak film that I use, and the Kodak HIE, which is their infrared, is the best infrared, and for 35 millimeter. I don't think they make it, they don't make it at all. They used to make it 4x5. But there just wasn't enough demand. And that slowly, that went out of business 5 to 6 years ago. The T-Max 3200, that just happened last year. If there's not enough, Kodak's going out of business. The digital has, what's ironic in the commercial world is that I know in fashion photography and in a lot of very high-end ads, people are going back to film. Because there's a look, I have been told, I have a colleague in New York who will drive me crazy because every time that I see him, he's like, Rosalie, it would be so much easier. You can get a dedicated camera body, digital, an infrared digital body, and then there's a program that you can then, once you've shot, you can add the grain. And I've seen digital infrared, and it's not the same look. It's similar, but there's something that is much more constant in it. So, what was your first question was about a whole other. Doing the birds, doing the autism, doing all of this?
Yeah, and of course in the journey of your life.
Well, I don't know that it's changed me. It's made me more self-aware of the difference between how I might be. Some people, and I think you have to honor this in yourself, some people could not take the amount of uncertainty that I've had by doing these things and sort of following, I haven't had for over 20 years a regular job and that kind of job security. And I was lucky in the city because I pay more rent in Salt Lake City than I do in Manhattan, which is unusual. I'm subletting my apartment right now. But I don't know, for me it was just following. Things just led me one thing to the next, and I think some people need a lot more formality, and it's just a different personality. So, when the birds came back into my life, that's when I really thought, oh my God, this is like a gift. I never, ever thought that I would be making my living because of birds. Does that?
I wanted to ask you about the discontinued film that you shoot on. So you said that you have a whole freezer full of it.
Yeah.
Are you dreading the day that you run out of your film?
I actually at this point don't think I will. And it's more, if the real fear, and it's still there, but knock on wood, is that infrared film, for years I thought that the whites, that glow was happening because it was reacting to the heat sensitivity. And a lot of people think that. And then finally I had a very technical friend who sort of burst my bubble one day and said, no. you know how the film itself is thinner? I mean, if you've ever handled infrared film, it's missing the halation filter, which then made sense why it would look similar to what those French filters were. It's taking out the whatever it is in the film that holds down your whites. So, as opposed to other film that it's not, other black and white films that's known, if you freeze it and protect it with plastic, it'll last indefinitely in the freezer. Nobody at Kodak, nobody can tell you how long it's going to last. I didn't think it was going to last this long. You know, there was a point before I got funded, I was like, well, I know if I don't, because I spent thousands of dollars to get that film. This is kind of crazy. But I thought, I can always sell this on eBay. And people do sell, I mean, you can buy, you know, I don't do it so much anymore, but when I was first starting out, and I just checked it out a few months ago out of curiosity, and people are selling like really outdated film that I don't know how it could possibly be. I mean, stuff from the late 90s infrared, you know, that hasn't been opened up, but there's no, people are not saying they stored it. So, for that.
This is just a question about the birds. How come you're putting bands on them?
How come what?
How come you're putting those bands on them?
Oh, the bands. Well, that's something that, there's a few different factors there, but the main thing with the pelicans is seeing where they're migrating to, the distances that they're flying. That's done with a lot of species, to see the trajectory where they're going. It's also, with pelicans, unfortunately, there's another factor going on now. It's this great irony that you know, it's a non-game species, so they're a lot less protected than ducks or other kinds of birds. And their reservoirs in Idaho and Utah and in this area where cutthroat trout are being dumped for people to fish. And they're a non-native species. But for the pelicans, it's like somebody's making a dinner table, you know. So Idaho now has permission to start oiling eggs. They may be able to start shooting some of the birds because sport fishing is more important than bird watching. But by banding them, I just learned this last week, they're discovering that the birds the birds are not coming from Gunnison Island that are eating the Idaho trout. I mean, so it's multi-purpose. Also, you know, the silver bands, I mean, if you ever find any kind of bird that's banded, you should call, you know, just take the band number down and call Fish and Wildlife Service or USGS. Anybody else? Okay. I think that was that. Well, thank you.